Hello and welcome viewers, I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump has stated that European leaders will visit the United States on Monday or Tuesday to discuss resolving the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, details on the leaders were not immediately clarified, but this comes as Russia launched a massive barrage of drones against Ukraine. Meanwhile, strikes continue in Ukraine even as global condemnation over Russia's drone and missile barrage grows. Now, Russia's energy minister has stated that Russian forces have attacked energy infrastructure in Ukraine's Kyiv. South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun will travel to the United States to address the detention of hundreds of Korean workers during an immigration raid. This comes as negotiations are underway to arrange the release and repatriation of about 300 workers who were earlier detained at a Georgia battery plant built by Hyundai and LG Energy Solutions. Former Foreign Minister of Japan Toshimitsu Motegi has become the first ruling party lawmaker to enter the race to succeed outgoing Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. The LDP plans to hold an emergency leadership vote on the 4th of October as the yen sinks and stocks meanwhile have surged amid political uncertainty. US President Donald Trump's 50% tariffs on Indian goods could reduce India's GDP by up to 0.6% this year, is what India's chief economic advisor V. Ananthanageshwaran has warned. He has said that if the tariffs continue into next fiscal year, the impact could be larger, hurting exports to the United States, especially textiles and jewelry. US President Donald Trump has stated that a ceasefire deal in Gaza could be reached soon to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas. He's warned the group to accept his terms, calling it his final warning. Now, reports are also suggesting that Trump has floated a proposal for hostage releases in exchange for Palestinian prisoners during the ceasefire. Thousands of supporters of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro have staged protests in cities including Brasilia, Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo ahead of his trial for an alleged coup plot. The court ruling in the case is expected by Friday, and if convicted, Bolsonaro could face a prison sentence. Aaron Patterson, convicted of murdering 3 elderly relatives with poisoned beef, was sentenced to a minimum of 33 years in prison. Now, the case is known as the Mushroom Murders, and she was also involved in the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, Aaron's husband, who survived. Judge Christopher Beale has cited Patterson's lack of remorse and planning as reasons for her lengthy sentence. Meanwhile, viewers, those are the headlines. More news coming in. Israel's Supreme Court has ruled that Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails are not receiving adequate food, which is a violation of their basic rights. The court ordered the state to improve nutrition to ensure prisoners' survival. Since the war began, thousands of Palestinians have been under Israeli custody, including people suspected of having links with Hamas. Meanwhile, tensions remain high as Israel continues its military operations in Gaza. The situation has sparked international calls for a ceasefire. With us on the broadcast is Ms. Shruti Das Gupta, international affairs expert, joining us from New Delhi. Interesting development coming in from Israel. Its Supreme Court has now ruled that Palestinian prisoners are not getting adequate nutrition. This comes as Netanyahu is escalating his war in Gaza. We do know that there's a lot of domestic pressure upon him. Now, the courts as well coming out with this fresh observation. What do you make of this?
Well, the court's observation came in response to a petition filed last year by 2 Israeli NGOs, and they have proved to the court that the basic requirement in terms of sustenance and nutrition is not being met. And the court in its ruling has kind of clarified that by starving the Palestinian detainees, you are not benefiting Israel's image as well as any of the Israeli brothers that are currently in a hostage situation with Hamas. So they've kind of tried to self-police the Netanyahu government and its extreme far-right Ben Gvir leader by saying that they need to adhere to international policies and show humanity. Because once the war, whenever it does come to an end, Israelis will have to have a lot to answer for, and they should not chalk up starvation, which resembles something like the Holocaust. They themselves as a community suffered during the World War II. They should not be party to something similar on their own land. So this is a very politically correct, morally correct line that the Supreme Court is asking its government to follow, and it kind of helps the Israelis to show the world that they're not against humanity, they're just against terrorism perpetrated in the name of Palestine by Hamas.
Ma'am, a quick follow-up to that. Donald Trump has now come out and put out what he terms as his last warning to Hamas. He stated that his administration is in negotiations with Hamas and they've put forth a new ceasefire deal. Basically the release of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. We've seen this take place earlier as well, but even as Netanyahu's plans for a complete total siege of Gaza continue, do you think with the US now stepping in that could change?
Well, US said that this is his last call, at least Trump said this is his last warning, and Israelis have not as yet formally acknowledged that they are part of this entire ceasefire. Hamas has formally said that they are willing to negotiate. Now, whenever it comes to negotiation, we've seen that no matter who is the mediating authority, it always falls flat because Hamas is not willing to let go of all of its political currency in the name of its prisoners. So this is something that is Trump has asked them to come forth and do, in return for which Hamas is going to ask for complete demilitarization of Gaza from the Israeli side. Like the IDF have to withdraw from whatever they've occupied, and they want a Palestinian-run state authority, which would probably be Hamas by any other name. So I don't think this is going to come to any fruition. We will see probably US step into this particular war aggressively after Donald Trump's warning.
All right, ma'am. With that, I would like to thank you for taking our time, sharing your perspective on these key developments we're tracking as far as the Middle East is concerned, shifting focus away from the war in the Middle East towards the war between Russia and Ukraine. We're now learning that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has supported US President Donald Trump's proposal to impose tariffs on countries, including India, that continue engaging in trade with Russia. Now, Zelensky has described such measures as a right idea to hold nations accountable for their dealings with Moscow, especially amidst the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. He has emphasized upon the need for stronger sanctions against Russia, urging actions beyond statements including tougher trade restrictions and tariffs. Remember, viewers, this comes as Russia has launched its largest aerial assault and targeted Kyiv with over 800 drones and missiles. Zelensky has reaffirmed the urgency for global partners to take firm actions against Russian attacks. We do know that civilians have also lost their lives in the latest missile barrage that had taken place late last night. In fact, a government building was also struck. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Glenn Grant, former advisor to the Defense Minister of Ukraine. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. What's interesting is, even as Trump is still mooting for trilateral talks, Putin has gone ahead and escalated the war even further with the latest missile and drone barrage we've seen, which has resulted in the loss of innocent lives in Ukraine overnight. Where do you think this is headed next? The EU leaders are going to be visiting Washington very, very soon. Is it urgent now, especially with these latest strikes, to finally chalk up a concrete security guarantee plan for Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a big ask that you're suggesting. I think the first thing is it's quite clear that there's no peace on the horizon. I know this trilateral talks seems to have come out of Trump's head because both Putin and Lavrov have said that there was no agreement of any such thing. And then we've had this nonsense of Putin suggesting Zelensky should go to Moscow and Zelensky saying that Putin should come to Kyiv. The two sides are as far apart as ever. And then when you talk about Trump and the Europeans going to see Trump, I mean, they're playing games at the moment. They're looking for security guarantees, but no one's willing to put troops on the ground properly until there's peace. Well, there's not going to be peace until someone wins this war. And at the moment, it looks heavily like Russia is actually beginning to get the edge. And one of those reasons is because people have not stopped buying oil from Russia, and so Russia is still getting the money it needs to keep the war going.
Indeed. And what else do you make of Zelensky's latest statements that have come in, especially with regards to sanctions against Russia? We do know that this is something that Trump has also highlighted earlier in the day. He's looking at probably imposing more sanctions. Will this really affect the Russian economy?
Well, I mean, don't forget, Trump has been talking about sanctions now for like 3 years without really doing anything. So he complained that Biden wasn't actually making enough sanctions, and now he's come in and he's not done any more himself. Um, so I don't see that sanctions are any super answer to things. He's clueless about what will work, and his team don't seem to be uh, actually interested in damaging Russia in any way. I suppose the biggest thing he's done is actually putting higher tariffs on India, and complaining that India is still buying oil. So I don't see what going forward from Trump anything that is going to have any effect. I may be wrong. I'd like to be wrong, but I haven't been on this matter so far.
And what do you make of not just India but also China being in the fray, purchasing Russian oil? It is the largest buyer of Russian oil, but somehow Trump does not seem to really be imposing tariffs upon China.
This is an interesting one, because of course China is not, it's not just buying oil from Russia, although it's not buying as much as it could, for the simple reason that the means of getting oil from Russia to China is still weak. Um, but it's also, of course, bankrolling Russia with technical support, chips and spare parts and things like this. Why is Trump not sanctioning them? Maybe because people are saying that if you do this, China could close down on selling anything to Ukraine and to the West, and the West still needs things that China has got. So China is in a strong position because of its minerals and because of the technical support that it's giving to Western defense.
So with that, I would like to thank you for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. Meanwhile, viewers, more news coming in. Now, we're learning that Chief Economic Advisor V. Anantha Nageswaran has now stated that US President Donald Trump's 50% tariffs on Indian imports could slash India's GDP growth by up to 0.5% this year. Speaking in an interview, Nageswaran has stated that the tariff impact could range between 0.5% to 0.6% depending on its duration. While US-India trade totaled $129 billion in 2024, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman emphasized that India would continue importing Russian oil, citing its cost effectiveness despite the tariffs. Now, exporters warn that the move could affect over half of India's merchandise exports to the United States, potentially benefiting competitors like Vietnam and China. However, Nageswaran remains confident in India's growth forecast of 6.3% to 6.8% for the fiscal year. This, of course, bolstered by a strong 7.8% expansion in the April to June quarter. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Jayant Menon, Senior Fellow at ISEAS, the Yusof Ishak Institute, joining us from Singapore. Thank you so much for taking our time, speaking to us on NewsX World. Interesting estimate put forth by the Chief Economic Advisor. We have seen a rather robust GDP growth rate figure put out by the Government of India just a couple of days back regarding its first quarter status. The growth rate was registered at 7.8%. But in the meantime, we do know that tariff troubles are looming as far as Donald Trump is concerned. India is attempting to diversify its exports as well, looking at alternative markets in order to reroute whatever is manufactured. What, in your assessment, would be the impact on the Indian economy in the short term and in the long term?
Right. I think the first point to make is that, the US is India's most important export market at almost 18% last year. So it's almost double its second most important, which is the Arab Emirates. So it's very significant. And a massive tariff such as this, 50%, will have an impact, especially in the short run, before you can try and diversify. It's of course difficult to put a number on it, but if the estimate is about half a percentage point of GDP growth, that seems reasonable. I guess a lot will depend on the accommodating policy measures at home. The major driver of growth is consumption. India's trade to GDP ratio is only about 50%. It's not a highly open economy, but nevertheless, it's going to be an important factor.
Indeed, and we've also been seeing a lot of people talk about the pharmaceutical sector at large. We do know that US procures about 40% of its drugs from India. Where do you think the India-US equation as far as trade in pharmaceuticals is concerned will head next?
Right. So I think pharmaceuticals are currently exempt, so that's a good thing so far. We don't know how long these things will last with this administration, which is highly erratic. We've already seen how sectoral tariffs have come into play with a lot of the metals. Pharmaceuticals could be, in the firing line. But I think, hopefully common sense will prevail. These tariffs will mostly and firstly hurt the US economy and US consumers. And that's something I think that will become evident very soon. We've already seen the latest producer price index numbers jump up higher than in 3 years in the last month. So the signs of the impacts of these tariffs are already feeding through. We've seen a sort of weakening in the labor market. So stagflation is a risk. So with these sorts of indicators emerging, I think, hopefully the Trump administration will see the sense in, if not reversing course on tariffs, on at least not imposing any new tariffs.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking our time, joining us on NewsX World, sharing your insight into what we can expect as far as the India-US strain in ties as far as the economic realm is concerned. Meanwhile, viewers, we're shifting focus away towards Japan, where we're now learning that candidates have begun emerging for the next leadership of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party following Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's shocking resignation. Ishiba stepped down after taking responsibility for his coalition's losses in both houses of parliament amid voter anger over rising living costs. Now, The LDP plans to hold an emergency leadership vote on the 4th of October. This comes as per reports citing a senior party official. Former Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi has reportedly become the first lawmaker to officially announce his candidacy. Moreover, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi has also intended to run in the election. Now, however, according to reports, the frontrunners are LDP veteran Takeichi and Shinjiro Koizumi, son of former Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi. Neither has formally announced their candidacy, but they finished second and third respectively in the last leadership contest that was held in September 2024. The political uncertainty has impacted financial markets, with Japan's yen sinking and investors now speculating that successors like fiscal Dove Takeshi may increase spending. Meanwhile, residents in Tokyo are expressing concern about the situation, with some hinting that Japan would struggle to maintain stability after frequent leadership changes. Let's take a closer look at what the residents have had to say.
驚きはしますね。はい。真面目な方ですよね。あとは総理候補って言われてる他の方が怖い方ばっかりだと思うんで、できれば頑張ってほしいなと思うんですけれどもね。はい。
びっくりはしないですね。誰がやってもあまり変わらないのではないかなという、ありますね。そうですね。この何回もここ最近もやっぱり何回も変わってるので、また安定しないんじゃないかなっていう。日本はまだ安定しないんじゃないかなっていう不安ですね。
All right, with us on the broadcast is a very special guest, but before I go across to him, we also know that some analysts have attributed to LDP's decline to Ishiba's leadership. Let's listen in to what Jeffrey Hall, a Japanese political expert, has had to say.
Sell the party's message to voters, and Ishiba did not do a very good job of selling the party's message to voters at all. He came in looking like he might be a reformer who would fix the party after scandals, but he did very little to address those scandals, and voters punished the LDP 2 elections in a row because they just weren't satisfied with the way he was running the country. They weren't satisfied with the LDP in general. The 2 frontrunners are Koizumi and Takaichi, and it seems like all indications are that it will come down to them facing off against each other in the final part of the leadership election. And so it will really be a question of whether or not the very hard conservative part of the party that supports Takaichi will be able to get enough support to take on the more moderate conservatives who support Koizumi. And Koizumi is more ideologically close to former Prime Minister Ishiba, but he has friends in the right places in the party, and he isn't quite as polarizing as Ishiba when it comes to the conservatives in his party. Whoever becomes next Prime Minister of Japan will have to offer some kind of economic plan. They'll also have to deal with the impact of American tariffs. Even though Japan did get an agreement that secured tariffs at a lower rate than Trump had initially threatened, the 15% tariffs on Japanese goods are still going to hurt Japan's economy. And this will contribute to the sense of economic pessimism in the country and people feeling like things are getting worse.
Joining us on the broadcast is Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, former advisor to late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He's joining us from Tokyo. Thank you for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you how exactly is the LDP leadership race panning out. Could you explain to our viewers a little bit about the potential candidates who are now coming to the fore?
First of all, this is not a national affair. This is a party affair. Nonetheless, the leader of the party is going to be eventually elected and endorsed by the parliament, both houses, lower and upper house, as prime minister. So this is to choose the next prime minister. And the grassroots rank and file members of the LDP will be made able to cast their own votes in the first round of the elections. If the first round brings about a single biggest winner, then the race is going to be over. But more likely, the first round is going to push forward 2-3 strong candidates. Then the second round is going to be between the first and the second strongest contenders. That's exactly what happened last year. September last year, Takaichi, the female candidate, Ms. Takaichi, won the decisive victory in the first round, and yet the second round among the parliamentarians nonetheless chose Mr. Ishiba. So it's going to be a big deja vu, I would imagine. That's going to take place for some time between now and 4th of October.
And whoever is finally chosen does have a lot of responsibility to shoulder. We've seen, in fact, Japan being rocked by inflation as well. We've seen the wages being stagnant over quite some time as well. We do know that there was a scandal that had tainted the LDP's reputation a little bit, although the results did end up with the LDP forming a coalition and coming to power once again. But in your opinion, how can the new candidate then win over those who were skeptical in the previous elections that were held this year and last year as well?
Whoever is going to be chosen as the leader of the party and then as prime minister by the parliament, she has to deliver policy platform agendas. But in order for them to do this, they need to increase their political capital by continuing to win national level elections, which is the reason why many analysts and pundits have started to say that soon after the selection of the leader of the party and the prime minister, the next prime minister is going to soon dissolve Japanese lower house. And it's going to be a huge bet. But unless and until the LDP will be successful to gain more support from the public, it's going to be difficult for them to win the majority yet again. And without winning majority in both houses, it's going to be a hugely difficult task for the next prime minister to deliver on the policy front.
So with that, I would like to thank you for taking our time speaking to us live on NewsX World as we track these delicate developments taking place in Japan. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus towards another important country in East Asia, South Korea. We're now learning that South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is heading to the United States today to address the fallout from the massive immigration raid that detained hundreds of Korean workers. The South Korean Foreign Minister will also discuss visa system improvements and meet U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The detentions had occurred at a Georgia battery plant built by Hyundai Motor and LG Energy Solution, where about 300 Koreans were arrested. Now, negotiations to arrange their return to South Korea have concluded, with plans underway to fly them home this week under a voluntary departure. The raid had sparked strong concerns in Seoul, which in fact interestingly came just 10 days after South Korean President Lee Jae-myung had met with US President Donald Trump to pledge closer business ties. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Sanjay Kumar, journalist at the Korea Herald, joining us from Seoul. Thank you so much for joining us once again, sir. Last time, I do know that there was a slight connectivity issue, but I was basically asking you, regarding the imagery that has come forth of these workers being put in shackles. Their hands were bound, legs were bound, chains were also placed around their waist. What kind of furor did this cause amongst the normal netizens in Korea?
Netizens have been venting a lot of anger after this action, and they were not ready to accept such kind of treatment in any justified manner, and they were not even ready to accept it as a civilian or a civilized way of treating the detainees. So that was the mood since the last 2 3 days. But now the demands are also among Korean people are growing, that taking this as an example, the Korean government must resolve the visa issues with the US government through regular consultations and making sure to have E4 visa, non-immigrant visa quarter in place. But to get this E4 quarter, a bill has to be passed in the US Congress, which is pending since last July 2012. So that concerns are growing here, that the foreign minister of Korea must talk to his counterparts in US and resolve this issue, and it must not end here, but it should start from here to resolve the visa issue for the employees of companies, Korean companies who are working in US and who are to work after these huge investments of 21.5 billion by Hyundai Motors, as well as almost 500 billion dollars of investment agreed between President Trump and President Lee. So here in Korea, people do not want to accept any kind of mistreatment, and they are considering this action as a very non-humiliatory, humiliatory, and they are not ready to accept in current circumstances.
You've in fact addressed the investment pledges that were made earlier, of course. On one hand, we do see that Trump is attempting to keep his image, that of a strongman, intact with his MAGA base at home, and is also trying to drive in more money. But how is this all really going down with the Korean administration at this moment? They've of course worked on a war footing practically to make sure that the workers are at least sent home in a dignified manner through voluntary departure. But do you think there will be any ramifications of this particular incident?
Well, you have correctly pointed out that voluntary departure has been the major objective of the South Korean government right now. Right now, the biggest objective is to bring them back because their families are in huge uncertainty, and they are very afraid because once this investigation gets carried on there, it may turn up into a criminal investigation. So that criminal procedure they don't want to face, and their families as well as the industry experts and industry stakeholders. For example, when I say industry stakeholders, it includes, there are many companies, big companies, giants, chaebols, conglomerates who have invested heavily in US and who are planning to invest in US in the long run. So in a way, it may please the MAGA supporters, but in Korea, the public sentiment is that it may affect in long run the MASGA, the Make American Shipbuilding Great Again also. From Trump's perspective, of course, he wants to address his support base because he made promises in the elections that immigration is going to be on the center, and he is going to protect the jobs of the Americans. And that is why when he's mentioning that only US people should be trained and they have to work on the ground in coming years and months, and those who are coming from the foreign side, I mean the Korean side, they only should train the Americans. So this is also sending not a very good signal here. And it is well known in the public that there was a gray area when it comes to this B1, B2 visa, because it has been practiced before. Only when Trump was leading the first administration, that time it was not very actively used, but this had become a kind of a habit of many Korean companies' employees to use that B1 and B2 visa in order to execute the things swiftly, because they cannot just wait for H1B, H2B visa and other sorts of visas that may entitle them to work on ground. So they wanted to fastly execute such operations of their companies. That is why they were on ground. Their purpose of entry was not to become illegal and to be a migrant or immigrant
But
of
to
the US.
expedite the work. Indeed,
Yeah,
sir, with
yeah.
that, I would like to thank you for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World, of course, sharing your perspective on what is transpiring as far as this particular development is concerned. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on this bulletin. Due to paucity of time, we must wrap up this bulletin here. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.